presentations here. We have a gentleman who is from University of South Florida, where he teaches in the engineering department. In addition to USF, he also teaches entrepreneurship at Fudan University in Shanghai. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Paul Schnitzler.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everybody. And I really loved listening to that because I've been around. If you look at my background, I've done a lot of things, and I've had my share of failures, but I'm not going to talk about those today. Maybe I will, we'll see. Okay, is that on, Peter? Is that on now? Okay. What I'm going to talk about today is change and leadership. Now, change and leadership is a pair of subjects that have had much study. There have been lots of academic articles written on them, and there have been many books published, both for humor and for serious purposes. Why talk about change and leadership again? Well, because with all of the background that's been done on it, with all of the work that's been learned, it turns out the ways to do this well are rarely used. I actually tried to find data to support that statement, and all I could find is everybody I spoke to agreed that basically this stuff doesn't get used. You do find it. You find it in companies that are on the Fortune best companies to work. But you don't find it in many companies. You don't find it in many managers. That didn't do what it was supposed to do. Okay, let's start there. American Airlines, you all have heard of, and you all probably know that it has had financial problems for a long time. Back in 2003, they were really struggling. They still are, but they were really struggling, and they decided that an operation called their maintenance services, a facility that rebuilds airplanes. You may not know this, but airplanes are rebuilt periodically. They base that on how many miles it's flown, how many takeoffs and landings. After a while, it gets worn out. They take the plane into a shop. They spend 6 months rebuilding this airplane. Can you imagine? It's a lot of labor. And it's a very expensive proposition, and the general management of American realized the cost of that alone may very well not just bankrupt American Airlines, it could put it out of business. What to do? Got to get the labor costs down. Oh, but wait a minute, it's a union shop. Conventional wisdom says you cannot get a union shop to help you in any way if it helps management. Just doesn't happen. Well, they didn't have much choice. So they sent the VP of Maintenance and Services, I'm not sure the exact title, nor the man's name, to get some way to solve this. And he invited the leaders of the union to come in, and he explained this first point. We, not us, not you, we have a problem. If we don't solve it, we'll all be out of work. And then he says, I need your help to solve this problem. And the union says, yeah, sure, right? You know, you can imagine the conversation going on there when he says, help me, guys. So he says, but let me tell you what I need. It takes 6 months to rebuild a plane. We need to get that down to 3 months, and we have to do it by basically reducing labor by 50%. Can you imagine what that room sounded like at that point? They either were angry or they laughed, right? I don't know, I wasn't there. He says, but I'll give you something in return. I'll promise you that nobody will be laid off as a consequence of reduced work. And if there's any attrition due to other facets of things, people retire, whatever, we'll replace those people. You will not reduce the total amount of people in your union. And we won't ask you to cancel a contract. So if this all doesn't come together, you still got your contract. Fast forward 3 years, because I didn't hear about this until 3 years later, and I read an article where Allegiant Airlines had just announced that they'd signed a contract to have their airplanes rebuilt in the American Airlines shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That sounded kind of interesting, so I'm reading through this. What struck me suddenly was a statement from the union leadership. Now, you don't usually see a business announcement, a PR release coming out with anything except people from top management. This was the leader of the union local. He says, this contract shows that Allegiant realizes that our people do the best work that's available on airplanes. Oh, okay. That took me back to the American Airlines site, And I found there a page where they talk about exactly this. That is that they are selling the services of maintenance, of rebuilds to other airlines. Well, that's fine. How could they do that? Their salaries are higher than the rest of the industry. Their benefits are better. And they can underbid their competitors because they cut the time not from 6 months to 3 months to somewhat less than that. They actually cut 60% out of the labor cost of doing rebuilds. How'd they do it? They did that with the cooperation of the union. But they didn't just ask them and then go away. They continued to have meetings with them on a regular basis so that both sides could be comfortable that everybody's doing what is expected. Management sees they're moving ahead. Labor knows management's still interested and isn't trying to undercut the deal. All right, so what does that mean? It means that if you want to introduce change, if you really want to introduce change, you must first make sure you have an urgent need. Must have an urgent need. If you don't have an urgent need, you won't get people to realize it's important to do this. American Airlines pointed out this urgent need to its labor people. You need to have everybody that might be involved in the end involved at the beginning. You must have their cooperation. I'll talk more about this a little bit later. And finally, I'll explain why later. You need to have balance. You need to have something that keeps you content that things are moving ahead, because otherwise it turns out you can go crazy. We'll see how. Now, all of this stuff is based on work of these guys and many others. I said there's a lot of research that's been done on this, a lot of papers written, a lot of books written. The first four guys have spoken mostly to the issue of leadership and motivation and getting the most out of people. The idea of a manager doing his job right is to make sure everybody wants to do the best job they can. Wants to do it. Not because they're being told to, not because they're getting a salary, but because they really want to do it. There's various ways you can help people get to that stage, but that's critical. You must get there. These first four guys talk about it. John Kotter from MIT, not MIT, from Harvard rather, came up with a whole package of how to do a change and do it successfully. And you read it and you say, son of a gun, that will work. Guess what? It works. I'll tell you about that a little later too. So, let's see what I got here. The way you start is you say, the reason I'm going to include people, and you see that's an important part of this, the reason I'm going to include people is people doing work know more about it than anybody else. The guy doing an assembly task on an airplane knows more about it than the engineers that designed it, because he knows, she knows what gets in the way when you're trying to do the work. The engineers designed it, and they did a fine job. They certainly did a fine job. But they don't know the details of the day-to-day issues that come up. Ask the people, get their help, get them involved. And they'll care, and they'll care. And so, when they feel part of the process, they become positive in terms of dealing with their peers. So you get a few of them involved and get them working on it, and you'll soon find, virally, the rest of the shop is on board. Everybody will want this to work because they have been recognized as being knowledgeable. They're valued, and we all want to be valued. We're not valuing them by telling them, you're valuable. We're valuing them by showing them we want their knowledge. We want them to be contributing. However, when people aren't involved, you actually have a negative effect. If I know you well enough so that I can say, I'm going to ask you to do this, I'm going to ask you to do this, I'm going to ask you to do this other thing, and by the way, you got 6 months each to do that, you'll go off and do it. You may scratch your head and say, why is he asking me to do that? That's not the real problem. But since I didn't ask for their feedback, they don't give it to me. They'll go off and do what I say. Even if what I say makes no sense, even if what I say is dead wrong, they won't tell me most of the time. And I won't find out I was wrong until 6 months later when they're supposed to have completed something and I go around and look at what's happening and it's not what I wanted. can take it another way. I can watch them day by day. Well, you know, how many of you have had a micromanager in your life who is right at your desk all the time? So every time you turn around, there he or she is. What are you doing now, Joe? Mary, did you get that job done? What's keeping you? What's taking so long? Guess how much interest that person has in really doing a good job. They'll do what they're asked to do, but not a bit more. You need to involve people. That's what people like Maslow and Drucker and so forth talked about in their work. So, is that a little voice in your head, maybe? Is that a little voice in your head? A lot of people have that voice in their head. Things will go wrong. I can't live with that. And here's the core reason why people don't do what we're talking about now. They're afraid. There is way too much anxiety associated with giving people a task that they asked for and letting them do it and not being sure it's going to get done. Way too much anxiety. If I have too much anxiety, guess what? I don't do something that gives me anxiety. Even if in my head, because I've studied this stuff, I know there's a better way, but I also can't handle the anxiety. All right? So you need a balance. You need a balance between micromanaging, which gets in everybody's way, and what might be called total freedom, laissez-faire, anarchy maybe, which will drive me crazy. Because I just can't, you know, if I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's progressing, I'm going to go nuts. Doesn't have to be that way. And that's where balance comes in. What we do is we do the following. We first work with the people we're going to use. You can do this in groups or individually. I say to this man, and I say, you know, how are you going to help make the project work? And you think about it and you say, well, I could do this and this. And I say, is that really useful? And you'll say, well, maybe not. What if I did this instead? Because your first answer is what you think I want to hear. But if I really want to hear what you have to say, you're going to give me a good answer. I said, all right, that sounds great. How long do you think it'll take? I can probably do it in 4 months. Okay. So we now have a timeline. Tell you what, let's get together regularly during that period. Every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, let's agree on some time. That way, I'll have some confidence I know things are progressing. You'll have some confidence I'm still interested in the work. And so you'll keep it going. One more piece. If you run into a problem that you didn't expect, that may interfere with getting the job done, you don't wait for our regular meeting. You come and tell me now. And that takes care of the rest of my anxiety. Not at first. It does as soon as you come to me that first time and I realize the whole process is working. Okay. It's got to be, you know, everybody's got to have a story like this, right? Your first time. I was a virgin. I was at Bell Laboratories. I had a small group of electronics engineers who did analog circuit design. You don't have to know what that means, except that you recognize the word analog is different than the word digital, because what happened right then was we were asked to design a new system entirely digital. And it was very important. It was very important because we were going to use this, let's see if it writes, yes it is, good. Because we're going to use this to prove that you can build a fiber optic system for undersea telephone communications, which was a big, very profitable part of the telephone system in those days. Everything was analog before, now it was going to be digital fiber optics. We were given the task, but oh, by the way, none of our people in my group knew how to design digital circuits. That included me. None of us had done it before. By the way, we had to make it better than anything anybody had done before commercially. And it had to be more reliable than anything anybody had ever done before, because you're going to put this in the ocean and you don't want to have to repair it. And nobody knows anything about digital circuits. So I brought the team together and I said, look, we've got to figure out together, first, what tasks have to be done, because I didn't even know what the parts were, what components we had to do. And then we're going to have to figure out who's going to do it. And again, I have no idea who could do what, because there wasn't any background. None of us had done this. When we have 6 months, by the way, we have to do a prototype in 6 months from when I first met with these guys. That's what my management told me. All right, 6 months, it's hard to tell whether that's enough time or not enough time or what. You just couldn't tell, but that's what our target was. So we met twice a week for 2 or 3 hours at a time, and weeks are starting to go by, and we're making lists and lists. We got this wall covered with flip chart paper, and we keep scratching stuff out and adding other things. We're making these lists of the things that have to go into it. Well, there's got to be a photo detector, there's got to be a laser driver, there's got to be a this, there's got to be a that. That's happening, but I still don't know who's going to do what, and weeks are going by. Weeks are going by, we only got 6 months. Talk about anxiety. That's how I know you have anxiety. I was getting scared. Are we going to ever get anywhere with this? And I still didn't have any idea who I could appoint to different tasks. I kept hoping somebody was going to say, all right, I'll do that. The only thing that kept me sane was a coffee pot in the back of one of the labs. Most organizations have a coffee pot that people go and take a cup of coffee and they hang around and they chat. And then we did. And they would hang around and chat, and what would they talk about? Last Sunday's football game, right? Or the hockey game last night, or, you know, you can figure out the things in your organization. That's what they talked about. And I'd wander by there, and I suddenly realized they're not talking about that. They're talking about a project. They're talking about what they need to know, what each one needs to know. They're talking about what they need to learn. They're talking about where the things we have on the list are right and where they're wrong. And I realized they're really working on the project right now. No assignments yet, but they're working on it right now. And then one day, it was about 3.5, 4 weeks into the process, one of the men comes to me before the meeting and he says, you know, Paul, I'd like to do this. I think I'm the one that should do this particular piece. I said, that's a great idea. I think you're right. Why don't you ask for it in the group, in the meeting? We're meeting later. Well, I don't know. And so what we did is we met later, and after a little while, he didn't say anything, of course. I finally said, well, you know, I'm going to tell you, Bud came in to me and he said he'd like to do this on the project. As soon as that was said, the room immediately started saying things like, well, of course, he's the right guy to do that, certainly. And with that, one after another, every key item on the list got picked up by somebody. In 10 minutes, the entire list was assigned by themselves. They all said, I'll do that, and we're done with the assignments. And it happened just like that. And so I thought, okay, we're off to a go now, but I'm still going to worry. So I decided I'm going to have them meet with me in groups about every 2 weeks, just so I can keep track of what's going on, so I have some confidence the guys are progressing, that they haven't run into difficulties that may not be urgent yet, but let's fix them before they get urgent. And so we developed a balance between micromanaging, which I hate to do. I've done it. I hate doing it, and I hate it when it's done to me, and the anarchy I was deathly afraid of happening if I didn't manage it that way. Well, now it's your turn. If you got a problem you want solved and it's going to require change, make sure you can identify the reason it's urgent. Because if you can't identify the urgency, forget it. It's not worth doing. It's got to be urgent. I don't care what the change is. Introducing a new software technology for customer resource management, customer relationship management. Resources is the enterprise stuff. Then invite the people who are going to be affected by it in the first day you start talking about it. Don't go off to Oracle and say, I want you to design a system and put it in place, and then you impose it on your staff. It'll sort of work, but you won't get nearly as much out of it as you could. And then don't let it go to chance. Meet and keep this balance going. Keep the people aware that you care what they're doing, and you want to know what they're doing, and they like the contact. Well, story. Quick story. I told you 2 stories now, so that's enough stories for today. Now it's your story. You go and find your problem. Find the problem that's urgent. Figure out who has to be involved. If you need more knowledge than that, it's a whole list of people you can contact in books and so forth. But then go do it. Don't drive yourself crazy, but don't let yourself get stopped because you're afraid of being driven crazy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. All right, please, if you come on over, have a seat.